Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Facets of Impact Season 3, hosted by New Socia. I'm Sindhu Nambiar, Director Impact and Customer Success at New Socia. New Socia is a strategic CSR design and impact advisory organization founded in 2017 to enable the ecosystem for sustainable impact. We are incubated at the IIM Bangalore NSR cell. Our vision is a world where every individual and organization is socially responsible. We are present in 4 countries. In India, we have worked in over 21 states across 14 SDGs. Our topic for discussion today is Ready to Rebuild. As you all know, the future of disaster recovery. I'm happy to introduce the moderator for the session today, our esteemed, very with a wealth of experience and expertise, Professor Santosh Kumar. Professor Santosh Kumar is a senior advisor to the National Institute of Disaster Management. He has over 30 years of experience in development planning and disaster risk reduction. He specializes in disaster management planning, post-disaster loss and need assessment, recovery, and inclusive disaster risk reduction. He has received professional training in disaster risk management from Israel, backed with international work exposure at the World Bank and the intergovernmental body of SAR. He has also worked at state levels in different capacities at UP Academy of Administration, Nainital, and Rajasthan Institute of Public Administration, JP. Welcome to the webinar, sir.
Thank you.
For
Thank you very much.
leading the session today. We are also at the same time joined with an esteemed panel of experts. Please join me welcoming Ipsita Das, Senior Manager at Tata Sustainability Group. Ipsita has over 18 years of experience working on social development issues across India. At the Tata Sustainability Group, she leads the disaster response vertical of the social service cluster. Her role involves planning, coordination, capacity building, and executing disaster mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery strategy. She holds a master's degree from the Delhi School of Social Work and specializes in urban and rural community development. She is also a fellow of the Visionary Leadership in Reproductive Health supported by the David and Lucy Packard Foundation, a professional exchange program that recognizes emerging leaders. She is a recipient of the Great Indian Women Leadership Award in the social category organized by the Women Empowerment Summit in 2019. Welcome, Ipsita, on board.
Thank you, Sindhu.
Our next esteemed panelist is Ranjani Mukherjee, Disaster Risk Reduction Specialist at the United Nations Resident Coordinator's Office. She leads the Disaster Management, Climate Change and Resilience portfolio. Her responsibilities include coordinating the implementation of the United Nations Country Cooperation Framework for 2023 to 27, with a strong advocacy for risk-informed development and resilience both within and outside the UN system. With over 17 years of experience in India, she works in the areas of policy analysis, project management, coordination, and capacity building. She has worked on and led projects related to mainstreaming disaster risk reduction into development planning, vulnerability assessment, disaster mitigation, urban risk management, post-disaster needs assessment, school safety, early and long-term recovery planning, and capacity building. Welcome, Ranjani, on board. The other panelist that we have is Mr. Mihir Joshi, the Regional Director, Advocacy and Partnership with SEEDS India. Mihir has over 18 years of experience in the humanitarian sector and is presently the Regional Director, Advocacy and Partnership at SEEDS India. He has worked on advocacy issues on localization and disaster risk reduction at regional and global levels. He is passionate about building resilience, strategies for recovery, and has been involved in different reconstruction and recovery projects after disasters. He holds a postgraduate diploma in earthquake engineering from IIT Roorkee and a bachelor's in civil engineering from MS University, Baroda. A warm welcome to all our esteemed panelists. Our session today will have two parts, a discussion with the panelists followed by an audience Q&A, question and answer session. Please share any questions you might have in the chat box and we'll pick it up during the question and answer session. Thank you and welcome all to the webinar. Over to you, Professor Santosh.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sindhuji, for giving a very elaborate this intro of all the panelists, including me. And so it's a very interesting topic which we have chosen for the second webinar of the series. And I'm glad that you have also chosen the right kind of a panelist for the same. First of all, let me thank you for giving us this opportunity, for moderating a wonderful session, which is leading to a kind of a, which we say that larger awareness amongst the stakeholders, and also plan for the future recovery programs if and contribute in the same. It's very interesting when you see this, that recovery has a two dimension. When we say that recovery of what? Recovery of building, bricks and mortars, or something else, that human life. So whether our recovery program should be focused on the housing, shelter, hospitals, infrastructure, roads and bridges, say power, communication, and so on and so forth. And if that is taken care of, what about the life, which is utmost important for any of the recovery programs, whether it's a short-term recovery or it's a long-term recovery. So what I would say that recovery program, which has started earlier in India, that not long-term recovery is not very a popular kind of a thing. Maybe in the absence of the resources, or maybe the absence of the ideas also. Both ways. So you can count on the finger that how many recovery programs, long-term recovery programs especially, have been taken in the country, starting from the Andhra cyclone to Orissa cyclone, and then Gujarat earthquake, then tsunami recovery programs, and now further 2018 Kerala, and then we go for the Jammu and Kashmir, and so on and so forth. And all these have this component of long-term recovery. So when we talk about that people-centric approach and recovery should be the main thing should be taken care of. So our panelists who comes from different background, we have a multiple stakeholders when it comes to the recovery, that is immediate recovery and also the long-term recovery. Immediate recovery, when we classify between the two, when we talk about the stages of recovery, immediate recovery start from the disaster, which we said pre-disaster, during disaster, and post-disaster. So during disaster, also it starts very quickly, just as soon as the disaster event is almost over, the response mechanism begins. So their response mechanism means that intending to immediate recovery, that how people life can become on the normalcy. So that the moment we consider response, then immediate relief, then restoration of emergency lifeline support system, the shelter, the medicine, and so on and so forth. The camp management and where people are there. And there we talk about that it should be inclusive, not exclusive. Then we also talk about it should also be a child-centric. It should also be gender-based. Then it should also acknowledge that people of differential ability. All these things, when we talk about recovery, whether we talk about immediate and the long-term recovery, we talk about or the inclusive recovery. So in this context, when we are talking about this one set of recoveries, emergency response to immediate recovery, then comes to the long-term recovery and rehabilitation where we talk about. The topic is also talking about long-term recovery and rehabilitation. So rehabilitation has a different process. Rehabilitation has a different tools, different strategies, different policy, different programs, different resources, different institutions. All have a different kind of approaches. And over the years, like we have seen as in 1999 Super Cyclone Recovery Program, till date, when we talk about that the recovery program which had happened in Cyclone Fani. So how the transition took place and how the various state governments have learned, institutions have learned. So I would try to understand from the panelists in the context of long-term recovery, especially that how we should strike the balance because it's a very seamless flow from one to the other stages of recovery. So one is the immediate recovery and moving to the long-term recovery. So my first question goes to the panelist, and I would request the first panel to Ranjini to respond that how to strike the balance between the immediate recovery and the long-term recovery. So these two, which we say the integral kind of a thing, and what are the uniqueness which you see in different types of hazard? Like when it comes to the flood, situation may be different. When it comes to the drought, its situation entirely different. Storm, cyclonics, or flood, which remains for longer period where it happens, the inundation and everything. And in such things like Himachal, we are seeing that one post-disaster need assessment was done, and soon after that, the disaster further aggravated, so that the recovery program got delayed. In such situation, where one side that immediate recovery is going on, and other side is also that process for long-term recovery has begun. So how do you see that? How in the acknowledgement of the uniqueness of hazard, how that strike we can strike the balance between the two, those who are into the governance or the stakeholders who are engaged in, how they should strike the balance between two. So, Ranjini, how do you see? You are seeing that all international thing at your place, and you are being as a UN coordinator, and you have been involved in most of the disaster recovery programs in India also. So, what are your experience which you wish to share with maybe concrete example of your own experience that how these two the balance can be struck?
Yeah.
So, over to you, Ranjini.
Yeah, thank you, sir, and thank you to New Socia for this panel discussion and for having me here. So, but before getting into kind of how do we strike a balance, how do we identify the interventions for early recovery, or I would call it short, medium, and long-term recovery. I think I would like to make six very quick points, like because we are talking about recovery, and as Professor Santosh you mentioned that it is recovery is complex and less understood. So if I look at the spectrum of disaster management, recovery is less understood, very complex. It's not a physical outcome, but it is like a process. So it is not very definite, but very transient. And also at the heart of recovery lies the people. So even if we build houses, we build bridges, we build the roads, people take much longer time to recover. So we have to keep all this in mind when we talk about, early recovery, different stages of recovery, or identifying the priorities. So that's the thing. Now, maybe I'll highlight here six quick points just to understand how to strike a balance. And then we'll give one example, a concrete example, maybe from Kerala floods, where actually I will try to bring in how UN responded because I'm from coming from United Nations, particularly a particular UN agency, how it responded to a particular need. So, first, in order to identify the interventions, whether it is at a very early stage, or in the medium or long term, it is very important to understand the local context. One should have a very thorough understanding of the local context, the context under which we are operating, because India and be it any other country, there's a diverse, the diversity comes it in terms of culture, in terms of practices, in terms of governance, and in terms of geographical conditions. So understanding the context is extremely important. Secondly, to strike this balance, it is important to ensure the ownership and leadership of the local authority at the various levels. Because when we do recovery, we do it at a scale. So it is very important, whichever be the stakeholder, be a civil society organization, to a multilateral organization, or to a government system which is delivering right on the ground, it is very important to have the ownership and the fullest engagement of the authority at various levels when you're trying to strike a balance or try to identify the interventions at different stages of recovery. The third, very important, is the need assessment. It is very important to do a need assessment across the sectors to identify what we need to do, and whether it is an early recovery intervention or a short term or a medium and a long term. Now, there are different kind of need assessments being done after a disaster. We immediately do a very rapid need assessment to assess the humanitarian needs, and then sometimes we do long term need assessment, which we call post disaster need assessment. We have a global methodology. Currently, government of India also has its methodology very much aligned to the global methodology, which helps to define the damage, the loss, and the recovery needs over a period of time, which we categorize into short-term interventions, medium-term interventions, and long-term interventions. And many a times there is an overlap between this humanitarian response and the short-term, or we also call it early recovery interventions. And it is very different. It is the most difficult stage in actually to draw the line. What exactly fits in the bucket of humanitarian response and what exactly fits in the bucket of early recovery intervention or short-term intervention. But at the same time, I'd say that people is at the center. So the focus is to restore their life. The focus is to give them support. So whichever bucket it falls in, it depends on how important it is, how timely it is. And that's why, it's very need-based. It depends on what the community wants, and accordingly we define whether it is a response or if it is an early recovery. The fifth point that I would like to mention is the timeliness, because one has to be very mindful about the time. Time is the essence of responding and to various needs at different stages, and therefore any assessment, it has to be done in a very time bound manner so that we can reach out to people or affected community with what they need at a very rapid pace. And finally, which I also mentioned in the beginning, the community networks, the need of the community, it is very important to kind of understand that, to define the need, whether it is an early recovery need or a short term or a long term or a medium term. So that's how you strike the balance. Now, coming to an example, I think which may help us to understand, and I'll cite an example from the Kerala floods. So, like the post Kerala floods, we all know the wash sector was badly hit, and there was a grave situation, and more than 20% of the affected population actually did not have the piped water connection. And in Kerala, 60% of the population actually depends on wells for their drinking water, and more than 3 lakh wells in the affected districts actually got damaged and disinfected. And so there was a huge need for the government to restore. So one is, provide drinking water supply to the people. And the second is to restore the wash infrastructure at the community level, because toilets were also impacted. So a survey was done in almost 981 panchayats. Kerala has more than 1,000 panchayats, and nearly 95,000 toilets were totally dysfunctional. Now where do we draw the line? Because the drinking water supply government had to provide drinking water to people for more than a month. So it was initially a humanitarian need. Later on, it became a short-term recovery need, because it took time for the government to, disinfect, clean the wells, provide the toilet facilities. So there were many interventions required, and we need to try a balance in planning it. So how we did it, UNICEF was the lead agency from United Nations system to provide support to the government of Kerala. So starting from providing technical guidance, developing SOPs, developing protocol on the cleaning, because it was done at a scale, and they worked very closely with the relevant government department in the state, the Kerala Water Authority, the Suchita Mission, and in Kerala, as many of you may be aware, the local self-government is very strong. So very close coordination, collaboration with the lead government agency at the various level was done in order to ensure that we were able to provide what is required. So one is the technical assistance in order to restore the wash infrastructure at the community level, training and capacity building programs for the frontline workers, and not only frontline workers but also the community networks, because these community people actually help government to assess the situation on the ground, like what is the situation, what are the challenges, what the community wants. So that was done. Then providing water testing kit to the government, because the water quality needs to be tested at the community level, and then setting up mobile fecal sludge units for again. So this is you start
Yeah.
it's a long process. it's a process. It cannot be just
Yeah.
achieved in a very like that, and we have to strike that balance, working very closely with the community and the government. Maybe I'll
Thank
stop
you,
here.
Rajni, because
And
no, thank you very much highlighting 6 points, and you stated very nicely. It's a very, very complex, and you do not know how to draw the line where that immediate ends and intermediate begins, and then intermediate ends and the long-term recovery begins. And in these complexities, process is very, very important. And you are time and again you highlighted one, the local government role, the cultural realities, and also the role of the civil society. It was a very strategically planned kind of a thing there in the Kerala recovery program. You were involved in that, and you very nicely hitted that example that how the drinking water problems was adhered and addressed in the immediate to the long term also, and also to the emergency to the intermediate term. It's very interesting, and you said that it is totally timeliness and also that ownership. So here, I would take up from your this clue from your this point of view. Mihir is working with the seats, and seats is a largely civil society organization and coordinates with the different state government also, and also part of the UN coordinating bodies. Even the government works and the seats are working. So, Mihir, what is your perspective from the community thing? And as Ranji mentioned, that community role is very important. And it's a multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholders event for the long-term recovery, so immediate to long. How do you see that ownership of the civil society group comes in when it comes to the immediate to the long-term recovery? How do you
Yeah,
strike the balance between the two in the cultural reality?
yeah. Thank you, Professor Santosh. I think what we have observed in our experiences, one is like as Ranjini has mentioned, the line is very blurred. The second, what we have seen is what is the objective? Like, am I audible? Hello,
Very thin, very thin.
hello. Is it better?
Ah, now it's
Okay.
fine.
I think the other thing which we
We
have
lost for
observed
some
is
time.
what is the key objective of intermediate let's say recovery versus the long term recovery. I think it will vary based on sector. Just to give you two example where we have worked. We worked in Poonch area after 2005 earthquake, and the major need for them, the winter was kind of onset, and the need was to provide them a transitional shelter quickly because they didn't had any safe shelters. Now in 2007 or 8 there was a flood in Badmer, which was a very freak incident for that region. And for the community in Badmer, there was no need for intermediate shelter because there was no kind of subsequent risk from any other, like either the weather based risk or other risk. So I think based on the context, I think we have to change what is intermediate and what is long term. Because intermediate allows us to bring the communities back to functioning ability. Because all the functions like education, health, as well as the housing will disrupt during the disasters, and intermediate will ensure that they are back to that functioning ability. And then for the long term we focus on build back better, which will ensure that we are ensuring that we are reducing the future risk. So that's the experience which we had, that different sectors will have a different requirements, and we need to ensure that we pre-identify as part of our needs assessment. And that is very crucial to ensure that we are fulfilling the objective from the affected community's point of view. And the role of civil society is very crucial because they are the one who are going to be constantly in touch with the community to explain these objectives and work with them to ensure that we are achieving those objectives. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Thank you very much, Mihir, for bringing these two contexts. One is this that has to be contextualized as the challenges, maybe the local level. And Punch area, and you also mentioned about that there was no shelter need in Barmer flood. So this is very contextual, and somewhere you have to have provide this intermediate shelter because it's a long-term recovery like Gujarat earthquake, tsunami, and so on and so forth. But these two have highlighted that the need may not be the same everywhere. So that has to be as when she was mentioning that she mentioned that PDNA is to be done and there is a needs to be identified. So here also that PDNA is a relevance in terms of that how when we are going for a long-term recovery where you're talking about resilience in the form of build back better. It's very interesting context which you have brought in that role of civil society and that how that contextualize in the local environment. They put in and they support the government. And also interesting that we have a panelist from corporate. So the CSR Ipsita is there. So it's very interesting that how that as Ranjani mentioned that we need to have a kind of ownership of the local government. Second is that support of the civil society is have to be brought into context, and they are there always. The third is this how the partnership can be built in the corporate. So, Ipsita, I have a question in terms of that CSR and other thing. Also, what we say as a how that corporate thing as a recovery, and one is that recovery which is being taken by the government, and also of the people there and corporate is also to recover themselves and also going for supporting the government in these you have to have a two kind of a balances. One is this balance between the intermediate to the long term, and also we see that how corporate focuses on their own recovery in terms of balancing of the immediate recovery and moving to the long term with the government and also your own. I wish to listen to you, Ipsita, at this point of time.
Sure. Sure. Thank you, Professor. At the Tata Group, the ethos for us is, which was coined so well by our founder, Shri Jamshedji Tata, that in a free enterprise, so community is not just another stakeholder in business, but it is the fact and the very purpose of its existence. So for us, this community, for the Tata Group, the community is at the center of every activities that we plan, and we reach out to the communities in terms of a disaster response. So as a private sector, being a business entity, we have focused on disasters since independence, and we've been doing across the country. And what is important for us is that we don't look at a disaster just in terms of as a reactive strategy, but also, how we are building in the build back better, so which restores the normalcy of these communities. And in this build back better, it's not just the building back, but it is how better we are making it. So the communities that we work, so identification of the most affected communities, their preparedness mechanism. So it differs from different states to different states, their cultural context, their needs, what is there. So what works well or what worked well in one response, let's say Uttarakhand, might not work or will not work in Tamil Nadu. So even as much as it is important for UN organizations and government to look into these aspects, it's also for us as a corporate sector, we build in these aspects. And as practitioners, so needs assessment takes quite a large chunk of the work that we do, and that brings in these elements. For example, in Uttarakhand, when we were intervening in the disaster, in the relief phase, we saw a lot of migration happening for the young youth, and they were moving out to in search. That was a distress situation. So in consultation with stakeholders, and the primary stakeholders was the community, then the government, and also NGOs, there was a huge need which had come up that the youth need skills which will help them to be, help those families to restore the normalcy. And also they need some kind of training in terms of building their skills. So an initiative was built in with within our ecosystem. We have different companies like the IHCL, which is the Taj Hotels. So they strengthen the skills, and they identified the youth, build their technical capacities on bakery units. And then these were placed in dignified employment. So that is one example. Second example is in Orissa, where the infrastructure was not there. The schools had shut down, and it was very important for the schools to resume its normalcy, where we constructed schools. So this was not just building schools, but where we involved the community and stakeholder as children. What are the things that they need? That is not just in terms of needs, but throughout the project also, in terms of monitoring. These communities also play a major role in monitoring of the work that is being done, providing us suggestions, because we come from outside and the community knows best how to respond, or what are the things that they need. So the engagement of community, that is very, very critical in terms of designing these long term recovery. And third thing which I would like to stress is the coordination and convergence between different stakeholders, with the government, the collaborative efforts with the UN bodies, and in different responses we have supported, including the Indian Army. So that was in Pulwama post the JNK floods, where with their cooperation and support, we strengthen our recovery programs, reaching out to the persons with disabilities, providing them with assistive devices and also their livelihood. So we've also done the micro level planning as well as looking at from the macro interventions. And it cannot be just one sector. So it's a multi-sectoral response, including psychosocial support and mental health, which is not so much talked about, and it takes a lot of time for communities to recover from from the aftermath of a disaster. So to put in short, like the plans are prepared, like we don't create bridges every time there is a disaster response, like building bridges every time, but one bridge that we build which is resilient, which makes the community come back to normalcy, that is something which we look as a strategy for our rehabilitation and recovery programs.
Thank you. So all the three panelists have mentioned about building resilience. And resilience is the key in terms of when we are talking about long-term recovery. In complex reality, when we transit from one to the other stage of disaster, all the stakeholders comes together and look at the local community. And local community, local strategy, local cultural this reality, and also demographic diversity, which we keep looking into this while planning. As you said, that micro planning is also needed very much. So to do this analysis, and all have mentioned about that identification needs to be done. What are the database you need and you look for developing such kind of a planning and strategy for the future recovery or long-term recovery, where we are aiming to build resilience? And that aiming to build resilience and linked with the livelihood restoration. As you said that you go for the training and skill building process also. So I would say, I'll go back to, again, Ranjani, that you mentioned about Ranjani PDNA. Mihir also mentioned about strategy. And Ipsita is also mentioning about that local micro planning to the macro planning. What kind of a database or information do you need for this? So that any state or any stakeholders, if they wish to start the planning for this and they wish to get engaged themselves, what kind of a data set which is available in the country, or what you recommend to be taken for that, and how it should be placed so that the recovery or need assessment can be done very fast, not losing much of time. Ranjani, would you like to respond to this question?
Yeah, thank you, sir. So, sir, first thing I would like to say, and then this is like based on my hands-off experience of doing 2 PDNAs in India and also doing several training on PDNA. Data itself is the biggest challenge when we start doing a recovery planning. And that's where we start struggling. Now, of course, baseline data, because whenever we estimate the damage or the loss or the recovery need, we refer to a baseline data. And even in recent Himachal Pradesh PDNA, so I understand you were also there, the one of the major struggle was there was no sectoral baseline data available for most of the sectors. So that's a big challenge. First of all, you get damage data from the department, which also keeps on changing. So, when you do a planning exercise and you want to make it time bound, but your data keeps on evolving. So that's one issue. We face this, and I'm citing this example from Cyclone Fani. So in Fani, when we were working on coming out with the recovery plan for the housing sector, we started working with the housing department. So we needed a baseline, like, okay, what was the situation before the disaster? How many houses got damaged after the disaster? And then the category, how many of are like fully damaged, partially damaged, or moderately damaged? Because while doing this planning, you also need to have a category. You need to do a damage categorization, basically to estimate how much money you need, and then give a policy guidance to government and what is needed to be done to ensure build in resilience in the housing infrastructure. So data is a problem. We do collect data, baseline data. So this is where the concept of recovery preparedness comes in, which is not widely practiced in India, but there are some countries which do it. It takes time, it's a complex process again, but probably if we have robust baseline available, that data actually helps in a much faster recovery planning. But there are ways to still manage the data again. They may not be very accurate. So there are ways like field service could be done, consultation with housing sector experts could be done, community visits to understand the housing typology, the damage typology, and then come up with a number. And then based on the number, you start doing your planning. Now, housing is still better when it comes to livelihood. I'm just giving two sectoral example. It is even more complex because in livelihood, because of the large informality in the India, the informality of the that exists in India, it's very difficult to again get the lively data on livelihood damage and livelihood loss. And again, an example from Cyclone Fani. Odisha, typically, it is not about only interstate migration, it is about intrastate migration. So it was found that there's a lot of migrate people from the, Kalahandi, Koraput district, they travel to this developed districts within the state of Odisha. And these migrants were badly hit because of the Cyclone Fani. Now, there was no data available of the street vendors, how much loss incurred, what kind of equipment they have. So this is again, data is a challenge for us. There are ways to kind of do projections and estimations, but whatever departmental data is available, we start with that. And then again, there are various departments. So if you want to have livelihood data, you just don't go to the commerce department. You have to go to agriculture, you have to go to fisheries, because livelihood is so complex. So I'll stop there.
Thank you.
But
Thank
the
you.
2 points is the complexity in getting the data and the challenges of projecting the data.
Very, very important point which you have nailed. One is this complexity, and state in this complexity is not prepared with the data which it requires actually for the planning. And you flagged it in terms of the data baseline, which is very much needed for the PDNA, and all sector-based approach is required for that. So in this context, when we are talking about the data management, Ipsita, I'll just come back to you again before I go to Mihir. How corporates struggle with this kind of a data, and if holistic PDNA is done, like even the corporate losses can be accommodated and calculated. Ranjini is mentioning about the migration. You also mentioned in about your presentation that micro level planning and the small level lower. I'm saying that the people in the informal sector, you are helping it. How you actually come to this conclusion that what kind of a program would help and what kind of a data support system you require for this? Whether private sector has Tata is having such kind of a strategy with the government or without the government also for assessing the PDNA or anything which we wish to have? Ipsita.
Yes. So for the data for the business losses, so each business house has their sustainability officers, and there's a safety and security. So that is their mandate. They will do the losses in terms of the business which is done. Like, for example, in Biparjoy, one of the companies based out of Gujarat, Tata Chemicals, having a good presence. So they did that, what were the losses. So that is taken care by the company. But in terms of the losses for the communities, the extended or neighborhood communities, we rely on different data sources. One is the presence of that local, that Tata group of company in that location, which is also working, doing the CSR part in that geography. So they have good connects with the communities, and the local administration there. That is one kind. Second is the data from the Bhuvan app, then the IMD sources. So that is something which government has also come up with these latest the technological advances, which helps in understanding our what interventions we can take place, and also the SDMAs at the state levels. So much of the work that we did in Assam post the floods in 2022, we focused in the southern district, Kachar, which is bordering Bangladesh, and the data we were able to, the first hand data, we got it from the SDMS. That helped us to at least make inroads. The third is the data from the communities, the panchayats, the local stakeholders, through different methods, which Rajni also mentioned, which is also similar to these how it is done by other humanitarian actors. And also post any intervention, we do assessments. So a third party assessments that also gives a lot of introspections on how this rehabilitation program, was it equitable access, was it inclusive, and there have been a lot of learnings, and we have brought in those learnings in our next the learnings which we have from our previous responses, and every time it has helped us to improve in these responses. So that's the kind
Thank
of.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So very interesting. Ranjani is saying that the government is having a complex, living in the complex reality when it comes to the data, and sector-wise assessment and sector-wise collection of data is needed, and they have to generate that data. Also to be cross-verified from the field, and each sectoral experts can actually that see the data, how it is emerging. Corporate is depending on also on the availability of the government online, offline data, as you mentioned about Bhuvan portal, SDMAs, and so on. So, Meher, what these two panelists are saying, Ipsita and Ranjani, and when civil society groups, when they visit to the state, and they make their own assessment also as a humanitarian organization, as a maybe situational report, or maybe, and they also participate with the government in doing the PDNA. Do you also encounter such kind of problem, and you have a specific suggestion for the future, that how the data system can be developed, so that, or to be kept, where that private sector, the government, and also civil society groups, humanitarian organization can capture it with authenticity?
Yeah, no, thanks. I think both Ipsita and Ranjini has highlighted the problems. I think those problems are there. The other problem which I would like to highlight, and then I would also propose that how we can go towards solution for it. One is, like, you have data, but when you do a ground verification, sir, we see lots of discrepancies. And partly is what is the understanding of damage and loss, because for an expert on some sector, the damage and loss might be completely different than a, let's say, a patwari who is doing the assessment, right? So I think there is a capability issues at the local level to understand this entire loss and damage, and how you calculate that, and that we have seen across various states, and there is a need to do kind of training and awareness raising at that level. I think how we can solve this. So one of the things which we are trying to do with NDMA is how we can leverage the digital technology. Can we have something like a loss and damage platform, a national platform, where we can also involve the community themselves to give the loss and damage data? Because at the end of the day, they are the one who has suffered the losses, right? So how we can effectively involve them and then highlight those issues, so that can be visible for all the stakeholders, including government, that okay, these are the requirements. Just to give you an example, we did the assessment of the flooding in Assam, and what we came to know, that for one family to recover from flood in that particular area, it takes almost 15 years. Whereas if you look at the traditional recovery work, it might go up to 7 or 9 years. and there is a huge gap in terms of understanding uh, issue. And once we highlight this, I think various stakeholders can come together and jointly work towards providing solutions. It's not that one stakeholder has all the solutions, but that once we have this data visible, I think all the stakeholders can pitch in based on their expertise, and they can help the communities to build the resilience. So I think in future, what we would like to see is if we can have a national platform where after a disaster we can see the loss and damage detail, and based on that various stakeholders can design their strategy to help the communities. So yeah, that would be my
Thank you. It's a very interesting point that how the digital technology can be optimized. Like NIDM is also engaged in developing that PDNA process, and also NDMA and United Nations and civil society groups, and that gets like all the data captured are only confined to the PDNA report. So how that go into the digital platform, at one platform where the solution is that one is the baseline data can also go digital, and also the damage data can go also to the digital. So institution like NDMA and IDM, and maybe the support of the corporate, and also with the support of United Nations agencies, maybe a form of consortium where the data can be managed, and that kind of things are coming up. Like, and you said that then probably damage assessment and prioritizing would be very easy to and very faster way to move on. So capitalizing this will help in designing also and monitoring also that how the recovery process is on. It's very interesting. So now I let me move to the another point here. When how, like, when we are collecting data, we also go for a lot of duplication, double counting, and other things also happens. Any of the panelists, like, we think that to react first, maybe since I'm discussing with you, Mayor. So can you also suggest that how to avoid duplication, and then we'll go to Ipsita and Ranjini.
Yeah, no, thank you. So I think, sir, for to avoid the duplication, I think we have to ensure that data is democratized, because
Mm.
one agency having a data and other agency who might provide solution, if that is not visible to them, they will spend resources for gathering their own data, and then ultimately we will delay the assistance which can quickly be provided to the communities. So I feel the coordination and trust building between various
Mm.
stakeholders is very critical. The second is how they can share that data, so the other agency based on their expertise can also help us to help the sector to ensure that we also make sense out of that data, because like I know the private
Yeah.
sector has a very good capabilities, so how that
Mhm.
can be roped in, and we can make more sense out of those data. And finally, of course, every data, the custodian is going to be the government. So how we
Government.
work with the government to ensure,
Mhm.
and I think the existing government has taken lots of initiative, and maybe we need to see that how we can push that such kind of data is available for all the stakeholders who want to work for disaster recovery in future. So that would be my submission. Yeah.
Thank you. Ranjini, I will come to you, then I'll go back to the Ipsita for the support. Now, one, this, Ranjini, you are saying that when we talk about avoiding duplication, Mihir has focused on the data, avoiding duplication and the role of various agencies, and the government role is the primary role. Now, coming to you, saying this, one is that many of the agencies are involved. They get involved in the recovery programs, and there are different funding sources also, and they come up with their different programs. So, how the data is captured from the different stakeholders, put in at one place, so that duplicacy of efforts are also avoided. It's not that everybody is doing the similar thing, but how coordinated way so that one part X is taking, another part is Y taking. Maybe the same component X is being done by them and Y is doing done by them. So how that consortium format, whether it's a kind of a solution on avoiding and also monitoring, Ranjani?
Yeah, yeah, definitely, sir. And here, I think we talked about democratization of data. We talked about the primary role to be played by the government. So I think this coordination between government and other stakeholders is extremely important. And in India, particularly after some of the major disasters, we have this, good example of how geo NGO coordination were done. If you refer to the Setu mechanism that was set up after the Kutch earthquake 2001, or you refer to the TNTRC model, which came up after the tsunami, or started with the Nagapattinam and later on scaled up at the state level. Again, a coordination mechanism to bring in all the multiple stakeholders together to look at what they are doing, where the fund is going, how to channelize the fund across the sectors. And then, of course, I think again it was done similarly in the Fani cyclone, particularly the State Disaster Management Authority actually used to have regular meeting with various stakeholders to kind of understand, to avoid duplicacy and also to channelize efforts wherever it is required the most. So I think robust coordination is key in implementing a successful recovery program.
Thank you. So UN is also helping and coordinating, and you are the office of the UN coordinating agency. So you are with all the United Nations, and you are also supporting the efforts of the government. So now Mihir also mentioned about the capacity building is lacking for pre-capacity building for the post-disaster recovery. So there I see the role and the data setup, which you said, and democratization of data and digitization of data, and one platform, single platform of the data, or maybe go with the state governments in capacity. How, Ipsita, you see the role of corporate in this? Like she mentioned that the corporate is taking the support of the, you mentioned about the support of the government and government agencies and the created structure of the government. Now, if the process begins, say tomorrow, like an IDM or NDMA, with the support of UN or humanitarian organizations like SEEDS and others also, they start building the process for data and also taking the efforts of streamlining the recovery, long-term recovery in the country with every state. How do you see the corporate roles in this comes forward as a sustainable development format, or maybe the corporate social responsibility?
Sure. So corporate is also one of the key actors. It's not just looked as a resource agency, but also they come with a lot of skills and expertise within the whole ecosystem. It could be financial, it could be economic, and it's a whole range of professionals that we work. So that's one way where corporates can look at it, because it affects everybody. And we all are, for working for the most marginalized and for the most affected communities with the intention to do good and restore normalcy. Second is, supporting what is already existing, democratizing the data that we also generate as a part of the our PDNAs or as a part of our not baselines but the needs assessment. So it is more of a transparent and mutual trust mechanisms when we look at it as an. So we are also a player in this whole response.
Certainly. We consider corporate as one of the key players. It's not that they are also the victim, and they are also the players of building sustainability.
Yes.
So, but we hardly have a kind of a coordination in pre-disaster scenario with the corporates when the government funds like an IDM or NDMA, or for that matter, state governments. So that was the question which has emerged today, that how to have a better coordination, what kind of a mechanism we should evolve for streamlining long-term recovery. And you said that you are a key player, one of the key players in this, and whether it comes to finance or whether it comes to the capacity building. So we have agreed for this, and now we have setting up the kind of, once the story is building like this, the disaster has happened, we went for that kind of a data system assessment and everything. We try to understand that what are the complexities and reality which we have, and how to move from there to the long-term strategy. And everybody focused, and as a prime focus, that resilience should be the key. Means don't build the risk again. So everyone is committed, all the sectors and all the government, all the partners are committed for building resilience. So you highlighted Build Back Better. Now, when it comes to that Build Back Better, from where the resources would come, what are the funding mechanism now we have a place? Now, Initially in India, we didn't have any funding pattern for long-term recovery. So only facility available with the bilateral and multilateral support, or you said that corporate support or civil society support, NGO support, and where the community strive for that. But today, when we are saying that we have a 15th Finance Commission, which they have allocated resources for long-term recovery, say X amount of money, which is there for that long-term recovery. How do you say and suggest from, I'm starting from you, Ipsita, then I will go to Mihir and then to Ranjini. What are the strategy which you said that the funding system can be evolved and supported? Say X amount of funding is coming to the state government from the Finance Commission as a kind of a requirement. They're there. So how the additional support would come from there for the long-term recovery? Yeah.
Right. So, for us as an example, like Tata Group, when we were responding earlier, we were responding as, different companies doing the disaster responses and pulling in the resources. So these were individual efforts by different Tata Group companies. But we came up with this Tata Sustainability Group, which is responsible for coordination of all these of the disaster responses as a group that we would be reading. So all the resources are put in one kitty, which is like for a unified response, so that the resources are well managed and better used So within the ecosystem, we have done that as a group. Now, when it comes to external stakeholders, we get into partnerships. So partnerships could be with governments, with local institutions, with local other corporates as well. So we have also collaborated with other corporates where they have it has been a joint response. So there can be different mechanisms for the levels of partnerships that is possible. And resources, I feel, is not a dearth, but the use of efficient, the way the resources are used, that is something which is more critical when it comes to the rehabilitation and the recovery part of it, because most of the resources are spent on the relief phase. With less commitment to the rehabilitation and long-term recovery. So it should be distributed in a way that it also is for a long term. And if media is not reporting of a disaster like say Uttarakhand now, which happened in 2013, doesn't mean normalcy has been automatically come back. So that is something which is more important when we plan, and also invest in assessments. That is also one of the critical. So as a group, as other private sectors, they do also work in collaboration with different partners and different entities.
So very interesting. And we would like to have also a kind of a mechanism to be drawn as a kind of a futuristic point of view, as a way forward from here. That what kind of a support we can and what kind of a mechanism we should draw to link and integrate corporate initiatives in the pre-disaster and also the during disaster. Mihir, what Ipsita has drawn the line that transparency is very important. And civil society, many a times they are questioned and they're also praised. So utilization, misutilization of fund and so forth. The fund availability is ensured. Now we are saying that how to utilize it. What is your take on this when any state is going for a rebuilding process or any community is going for a rebuilding process as a form of build back better? How do you see that it is ensuring that it is really going into the right direction?
Yeah.
A monitoring system or mechanism, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the answer lies into what are the pre-agreement we have for this. I think the problem is we talk about disaster when disaster has already happened. And I during the non-disaster time, I think we need to talk about the financial mechanism, accountability mechanism, that okay, what should be the reporting. I think what we have seen, sir, based on our experience, the the accountability can be ensured if you are transparent in terms of the sharing the updates and the data directly, how you are spending the money, because that builds the confidence of any stakeholder, including the government. The second, what we have seen is that how also you are leveraging the existing funding mechanism, which is not only which is not for recovery. Like for an example, there are lots of developmental projects going on. So how, like what we have observed based on our experiences to ensure resilience, you have to top up what is already going on. Just to give you an example, while we were doing a long-term recovery project in Gujarat after the Gujarat earthquake, the project, the intervention from our side was financial resources to ensure that there are earthquake resilient feature in the housing, and then the kind of how we build the awareness, what are the importance of that. So how we can also leverage the existing funding which are available. There are also some new initiatives which are in pipeline. For an example, social stock exchange, how let's say civil society or other stakeholders can tap into that. The other area which is really coming up, and I think the Indian government has utilized a lot, is the insurance. How we can have insurance as a risk transfer mechanism. If you look at the entire Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, it's based on the parametric insurance based on the losses. So how that can also be part of some of the sector under which recovery is planned, and how we can utilize more such kind of tools that can ensure that we are efficiently transferring the risk of the communities. So yeah, let me stop here. Sir.
Yeah,
Back to
thank you. Thank you very much. Ranjini, you have heard that these two panelists, and they have suggested some very innovative steps. One is that saying the transparency and also building trust deficit should be breached by the government or by the all the stakeholders who are engaged in this. Some innovative mechanism after finance commission, which we are saying that insurance as one of the thing. There are many countries are also going for a floating of bond and other things also, and also dovetailing. Meher also mentioned about the dovetailing of the development programs for the resilient building. What is the United Nations? You have a global experience in terms of that, how United Nations, UNDP and others are working in terms of building resilience, utilizing resources, and also a meaningful investment. We say recovery is an investment. It's not expenditure. So how that investment can bring dividend when it comes to the bringing all these new financial tools, not depending on that one finance commission or the bilateral or the multilateral World Bank, ADB support or UN support, but there are other mechanisms too. So how that other countries are actually pooling their resources for this, Ranjani?
Yeah. So, sir, before going to that question directly, there are two things like currently what India is missing, and probably many other countries have, is also the recovery framework. We do not have a national recovery framework which actually can outline some of the things which we are talking about, like what kind of accountability mechanism should be in place, what kind of strategy should be in place to mobilize resources, and what kind of strategy should be in place to dovetail resources from the ongoing development schemes. So that's number one. Second is, if we look at the international practices, the concept of resilience dividend. Now, it's like it would be wrong to say that funding is not available. We have special funding window for recovery, and even if we look at as overall in the country, we have a lot of funding across the sectors also, but still funding is not going for resilience building, and because we do not have enough evidence and visualization of the concept of resilience dividend, that if we do this, how it will help in reducing the loss of assets, how it will help in reducing the disruption of services. So again, this is something which we need to kind of focus on, and this is currently being done in other parts of the world. Some of the other things which you mentioned, that capital market resilience bond, and social insurance, strengthening of social protection schemes and systems, these are the various interventions being done in order to kind of bring in more funding for recovery. So I'll stop there, but
Yeah,
the
thank
two
you.
key.
Very interesting point, which recovery framework and resilience. Entire gamut of recovery, which we are saying from, we say that poverty to prosperity. And in terms of that, build back better is that from crisis to normalcy and even better. So entire gamut, which we have seen, and I think many things which we have covered. from my side and the questions which we have raised and you all have responded, I think we should take some questions. If we have any question from the audience, those who are listening, our delegates who have joined this group, any specific questions do we have from any of the panelists, or which we can raise, or we can, and then otherwise I will have my own questions to these panelists. So I would request
Yes, sir.
Sindhuji to help me out. And
Yes,
I will
yes.
also take your comment at the end and the whole discussion.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There are questions. There are several questions, and some of them are general ones addressed to the entire panel, while some of them are focused to some of the panelists. So it starts from the very beginning to the end, at the utilization of funds to how to focus on the immediate and long-term ones. So one question is that in the wake of the recent disaster of glacial lake outburst floods in Sikkim, what are the thoughts of our panelists and the moderators on the need of embedding the disaster risk reduction in the planning of such high value infra projects?
Yeah, very interesting question. I would raise this question to the panelists, then I would also comment. Very quick comments on this question. Any of the panelists would like to react to this? On the yesterday, what happened, day before yesterday in the Sikkim and all of the things, and Glof, we say that Glof and glacier lake burst is due to that. So what is the long-term thing? Yeah, Mihir,
So,
please.
no, I think so. What is currently we are seeing, what is missing is the entire understanding of local risk. I think we have a macro understanding of the risk, but we doesn't know that how that translate in a specific area and what kind of repercussions we might face. I think what is required is at least, and particularly for a big infrastructure project, is a detailed risk assessment of such infrastructure. We have an environmental impact assessment, and I feel that risk assessment should be mandatory for such kind of projects to ensure that we take into consideration while designing such kind of big infrastructure project, because it might result into losses of both kind, economic as well as the human loss. And it's a time that we mandate that risk assessment should be part of such kind of big infrastructure project.
Thank you. Thank you. Rajini, you would say?
No, I fully second what Mihir said, that it needs to infrastructure risk assessment need to be a kind of a mandatory thing. At the same time, the challenge that we have is whenever this infrastructure building happens, there's a lack of a life cycle approach towards it, and there lies the issue, because we have to have a balance. We still, so when I say life cycle approach, it starts from designing to decision making. So planning, designing, decision making, constructing it, and service and maintenance and operation. So currently there is a gap there. Capacity is not built across the life cycle, and this life cycle doesn't only involve engineers and architects and civil engineers, and it includes other people also. So all need to be brought together. So risk assessment combined with the life cycle approach towards infrastructure management.
Thank you. Ipsita?
Yes, very much similar like what Mihir and Ranjini said.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So my quick response could be that first fundamental needs to be asked that government is not the only player to own the risk. The idea is everybody owns the disaster in terms of that everybody respond to that, because it's very visible. Risk is invisible. Risk management is invisible. So how that we can design thing as a part of risk auditing, risk assessment, and as a life cycle approach in terms of where things are invisible. When it is not loud, it is loud those who can see the risk. But those who cannot see the risk, it is not loud. Only disaster is loud. So idea is how that people can think of where they are living into the local area and how can they become the voice of the risk manager. I see that because India is, people are awakening after only disaster. So in our country also, experts are emerging also from various disasters. So I need to just mention that to have this understanding of risk, NIDM has taken initiative to integrate disaster risk management in all the stream of higher education, graduation and the post-graduation, engineering, and also the medical stream. So it is gradually going on. So what I would say, maybe that probably will percolate. We are also struggling that how we can go ahead to everyone start understanding the risk, start auditing the risk, and how we go for the life cycle approach. And every individual, every community, every panchayat, that should be the approach gradually. So I think that way. Any other question? That's I wanted to mention to add whatever the panelists have mentioned.
And
Um,
sir, I have a quick
Sindhuji,
point to add on to
yeah,
what
yeah,
you
please,
said.
please. Yeah,
Basically, I think we also need to, we have a lot of existing infrastructure which are already built and they may create risk. Our
yeah,
investment currently in the operation and maintenance of this infrastructure is very, very low. We
very
need to
low.
have a robust mechanism at least to maintain this infrastructure which has a potential to create a high risk. So
Very
an
good point.
emphasis on that
Very
is
good
also
point.
very important.
Very good point. Thank
Yeah,
you,
so
Ranjani.
so I just would like to share one number because I was reading one of the CDRI's report, and
Hmm.
interestingly, for all the big infrastructure, the 90% of investment happens during the initial phase where you are constructing, and the remaining 10% goes into maintenance, operations and maintenance. And so there is
Hmm.
a huge discrepancy even in terms of the amount of resources which we are kind of allocating for such big infrastructure. So
Very true. So very true. Thank you. Uh, so Sindhuji, you have any other question
Yes,
from delegates? Yeah,
yes,
quickly.
there are many questions touching upon the accountability, transparency, and governance issues. I think we have covered some of most of them
Mohammed
in our
Apom.
discussions throughout.
Right, right.
And also, the another question was also looking at we have looked at the data availability during the assessment, but what about the outcome reporting results and the perspective of learning and good practices? Although Ranjani had already mentioned that there's a concept of resilience dividend is not very
Hmm.
evident, and like people are not looking at it. Would you like to further
I,
explain those
I,
points?
I would just say, and I would request all the three panelists to quickly respond to that. I would say in this the dividends, most of the disaster recovery program which have taken in the country is all based on the Build Back Better approach. And but unfortunate part is that it becomes and remain as an island. That learning doesn't go to the development planning, so it doesn't get translated into that. Even if, say, any state is doing a good recovery program, very resilient recovery program, but unfortunately, in the same proportion, doesn't go to the kind of a translated into the development programs. So here is the challenge that how to bring those learnings. If you collect those learnings from all the recovery programs, as Ranjini was highlighting, very good example from the local government initiative in Kerala, 2018, and how they have brought in. Women played a very crucial role, and especially many organizations like that. We have a similar best practices almost in all the recovery programs. But how that translate those states, those who are not affected, whether we have a recovery framework well in advance. So that dividend, when we are saying, is that one that had that recovery plan, or have that budget before that, have that kind of a database system before that. So my concern is this, that it's not that wait for the disaster and then start PDN and then have the recovery kind of a framework. So very rightly, I support the point of view of Rajini. So, and the question which is coming up, these are the lacking point which all the institutions, all the individuals have to work together. Anything point on this point, Ranjini, would you like to say, or all the any panelists? If Sita, you have not spoken in the previous one, so can you?
Yes, so definitely, we do a lot of work. There is a lot of energy on that, but when it comes to documentation and sharing of those what worked, what didn't work. So I mean, we talk about what worked mostly, but the challenges that we encounter, that is not documented somewhere. So there is definitely a lot of scope to bring in this documentation part of it. Secondly, what we have also done is that with the corporate, so the development work, we are trying to mainstream this disaster risk reduction. element into it, the risk management. So how we embed that rather than running separate programs on which only looks after disaster risk reduction, we embed that within the sectors on building resilience as a part of the work. But in terms of documentation, and there has been a lot of good experiences which is happening across even for us as a private sector, which is being done, which we lack documentation. So that is something as an area we can definitely work
So
more.
what transporting learning from one place to
Yes,
another place. So
yes,
documentation could be a very ideal
definitely.
starting point to take up.
Yes.
Ranjani, would you like to mention something
So,
here?
sir, just a quick point. I talked about it earlier also about recovery preparedness. So, recovery
Yeah.
as a practice area becomes very important, gets a lot of limelight when a disaster strike. But
Mm.
in a time when there is no disaster, we need to focus on, continue this conversation on recovery and then talk about recovery preparedness, recovery planning, recovery framework, and then only actually we can see, real changes on ground.
No, that
Because
changes.
I would still say that as a practice, we only start focusing on it when there is a major disaster.
No justice. Thank you. This is a challenge. Meher?
No, sir, I echo the points from Ipsita and Rajni. I think we also have to be bit innovative in terms of how we are documenting, sir. I think today
Mm.
the storytelling mode and use of different social media and all that has evolved a lot. I think as a sector, we also need to adopt those tools to see that how effectively we are communicating. And there is a knowledge and practice gap, sir. The other
Yeah.
critical stakeholder is the academia. I think
Mm.
there should be a exchange in terms of what are the key issues where we don't know much. Like for an example, one area where we don't know much is the psychosocial care, and how it
Mm.
is impacts the disaster affected communities. There are short term as well as long term impact, and we need more information. So how we identify such issues and communicate with the right stakeholders, so we can also do little bit of research
Yeah.
around that.
Like institution, like, yeah, very, I agree with you. Many of the institution have to come together. Like NIDM has on the way this Prime Minister 6 point agenda created this network of universities and institutions. So we have 260 universities and institutions now on the at one platform. So one platform is we have central universities, IIT, IIMs. They all are there, and say where that the idea is to give this benefit to the people, that how those documentation can actually get translated into knowledge to practice. So first to create knowledge also which is not there, and also go to the practice. So that system, maybe such institution have to take larger responsibility, and IDM also, along with the partners like yours and UN and corporate, where we have to have a kind of a such interventions to be taken forward. Ranjini also mentioned keep hammering on resilience dividend, and that resilience dividend and recovery framework. So the culture of prevention should prevail, recovery. And you highlighted about the long term in terms of recovery and trauma. Our child-centric disaster risk reduction has done a study. Those children who became orphans during the COVID-19, and those children whose single parent died, and whether both and one situation like that, and they are very small children, and also that and is the result which we are analyzing is a really uh, we cannot say to public today, but what are the results which are coming up. But these are the learning points to be drawn into the policy framework, that how the public policy, that these documentation which you all are mentioning today for recovery, how that form help in drafting the new policy, if that is to be addressed at the larger scale level. So institutions like SEEDS, UN, Tata, NIDM, and many other, like the consortium which I mentioned, Indian Universities and Institution Network, they have to come up with a larger responsibility with the incubation center where we are this. So thank you, Mihir. And any other question? Because I think we have just 5 minutes now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Actually,
Sindhu.
I would. Yeah, I think we addressed almost
All the questions,
major
so we can wind
questions.
up.
Yes,
So, what
yes,
is
sir.
your
Yes, sir.
comments on? Would you like to say anything at this on the whole discourse?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I would like to. I would be. I will take this opportunity to thank all of you, the eminent, the panelists with rich experiences and diversity, in how
Well,
excellently the discussion has woven in to give touch upon different aspects and looking into it. And the tagline, I would say, the punchline is like, sir, what you told us, it is an investment, not an expenditure.
makes
The
sense.
expenditure on
Yeah,
resilience and recovery should be considered as an investment, not a kind of an expenditure, which is the valid thing, which actually answers and completes the circle,
definitely.
I would say. I don't want to
Thank
go
you.
into details because it's already
No, no,
a lot
just
of time
so
taken.
so so. No,
Yeah.
thank you. But I would just conclude, and before I thank all the panelists from my side as a moderator, just see the summary that what are the things which have emerged. We started with the complex reality that yes, recovery from immediate to the long term, the transition is very complex. We do not know and hazard type, and also in these challenges, how recovery can be drafted. Whether ownership became as a bigger issue, that how ownership can be taken up at the local level. So one is that we thought that we need to have a first recovery framework in the country. So that's one recommendation which came up as a recovery framework. The
Yes.
second is that the one is that recovery framework. Second is the capacity building for PDNA and other taking it forward. How that capacity building can be taken in the pre-disaster scenario. There's a huge gap, and third is the capitalizing on digital technology, that how we can go ahead with this. The fourth would be in terms of the coordination mechanism with the transparency. So coordination mechanism with the transparency, we have to have more of technology and sharing of that. The fourth point, which I would like to mention here, is in terms of operation and maintenance is a big issue, and how that will form as a part of in terms of the risk auditing part and risk assessment part and mainstreaming part. Along with these three, operation and maintenance should not be neglected. So operation and maintenance would be the fifth point, which I would say in terms of innovative financial tools, should not be confined to that what finance commission, but also bonds, insurance, and other practices. Then we have as a kind of a lifeline approach in terms of the infrastructure. And so we say that culture of risk auditing should be done to the infrastructure. And one is this bringing partnership is the most essential, like community, government, non-government, corporate, private sector, and essentially to be led by the institution at the national level and also at the state level, and building community as a stronger point. So all the recovery programs should focus on the community centric. Life and livelihood is the center, not only bricks and mortars. So that's what we say, that is a humane approach, not the only structure approach. So it's a combination of the two. So overall, when we talk about pre-disaster to the post-disaster and how to address this issue, probably this will bring trauma management also coming as a forefront, as you mentioned, that how mental health to be taken up in the top priority in the whole of the recovery program. So I would end here in this all summary of the whole thing. And I extend my heartfelt thanks to all the panelists, to Mihir, to Ranjani, and also Ipsita, and of course to you, Sindhu, and to giving this opportunity. It's a wonderful learning experience for me as well. Thank you very much on behalf of NIDM and on my own personal behalf. I extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank you,
so much,
sir.
Thank you.
all the panelists, for sparing their valuable time to share their views and on this important topics. How we realize that how important it is to invest in the resilience and recovery. Thanks to all
Yeah.
the people who joined us. We hope that this session has been useful for all of you. For our next episode in the disaster risk reduction series, titled "Are You Prepared for Disaster?" is scheduled. for October 12th, next Thursday, and will address critical challenges in disaster preparedness. So please follow us on social media to know more about the upcoming sessions and save your spot. So have a great day, all of you, and thank you so much, all of you, holding you back for the from lunch. Please go ahead and relish
Thank you.
your lunch and have a great day ahead.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you all the
Thanks.
And my
panelists.
special thanks to all the audiences who have joined and asked questions. A special thanks to you. Thank you.
Thank
Along
you.
Thank you
with the
so much.
panelists. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir.